Hi, Courtney.
Hello, Elsa. How are you?
I'm doing so good. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me.
of course. And I know it took us forever to actually connect, what with the world falling to pieces.
Right.
Uh, but I'm so happy to actually be able to have this conversation with you. I honestly wish that I would have just recorded the first conversation we had when we met because it
We
was
got
like
deep. I loved it.
everything. It was everything that I love about what you do and about food and how it plays such an integral part in our lives. And like when I started Compose Living, it was always, and like even choosing the name, it wasn't intentional that it would be so focused on just home organization. It was with this idea of like, how can we help people just live really well
Mm,
in every aspect of their lives? And so much of that, obviously, like for me, is about being organized and simplifying. But it's also like, how can your meals be amazing? Like, how can your meditation practice, like your home, your car, like all these decisions that you're making, how can they serve you and the planet and humanity in like the best way possible? And so I get to talk about food with you, growing
I
it,
love
eating
it.
it, all the things.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think what you're saying is the realization or the awakening that most people are having that there's an interconnectivity to so many things in our lives. And you can look at on a large scale like what's an economy or a food system or even something like poverty or homelessness. It gets very complicated, and the same can go for our own life. So, and or your business, how you're setting it up, where you had
Yeah.
the intention of it being one thing, but you realize the minute you start tugging on all these strings, something over here starts to move, and well, wait, I can't really address this problem unless I address this problem too, or making this problem a little bit better helps this one raise up a little bit too. So yeah, I mean, the work that I do in kind of the food sector, the farming and agriculture and education sector, there's so much connectivity with other issues, with other problems, with other solutions, that it's hard to just have one carved out conversation without talking about a lot of other things. So
Oh yeah,
it's
for
it's
sure.
the new it's kind of the new way to view problems or challenges, or addressing your life in that way of like, oh, I
Yeah.
want all this clutter gone. It's like, all right, well, tell me about your childhood.
Yeah. Let's talk
Like,
about your emotions.
yeah,
Uh,
like what's your relationship like with your parents?
yeah,
Exactly.
100%.
So
But and so that's how like I already know that you and I will have so many more conversations in the future because this is such a vast topic and one that I care very deeply about. So I look forward to even our future conversations. But can you tell everybody your name and what you do and just a little bit about yourself?
sure. My name is Courtney Guerra, and currently I am a farmer and educator, I guess best way to put it. I have two young children, a 3.5 and a 1.5 year old, and I live in Ojai, California. I'm happy to go deeper into any of that, but that's just my like top layer bio right now of just who I am and what I do.
Awesome. So talk about, I guess, like how you came to be a farmer, uh, and I guess a little bit about like what you're doing to educate people, like what you're most passionate about in that space. Uh, yeah.
Okay, so I started, I guess my journey to where I am now started in volleyball. I was playing volleyball since I was about 13 or 14. I played through high school and college. And then when I graduated college, I played professionally for about 6 years. And when I was done with that, I had an office job for about a year. And it just wasn't for me. I really, after I was done with that year, I committed to it. And I felt like your career and what you do for a living is so much of what you do in general, 8 hours a day, but who actually just leaves the work at the workspace, right? It just comes home with you. And I just wanted to live a life that I could have, infused with passion, and something that I really felt like, if I wake up every day and I'm doing this thing, that at the end of the day, it's going to be a good day. So for me, that was food. I while I was playing, I worked part-time for a caterer and worked in restaurants. So I had an idea that I love food, especially on like my grandparents on either side really kind of imprinted on me early, just food culture. And so on my dad's side, Hispanic, and on my mom's side, very much like a white experience of food and culture. And each of those experiences were really special in their own way. And so to make that decision to say, okay, well, my next passion is going to be food, and I don't exactly know what I want to do other than I'm really interested in it, and I'm going to give myself these 2 years of culinary school. So I enrolled in culinary school at the CIA, which is the Culinary Institute of America. And I went to the campus that is in Napa Valley. And it's a 2-year program, and it's a very, high quality education that we get there. While I was in school, I really fell in love with fine dining, and I had no experience with it. I knew nothing about it. But I started to learn about these chefs who really took cooking to this whole different, art form. They made it craft, and the mastery of using the highest quality ingredients that you can and turning it into just artwork on a plate. To me, it was the pursuit of excellence that really resonated with me. There were so many parallels from being an athlete and that kind of mindset to going into a fine dining kitchen, and it's competitive. At the executive chef is like barking at you. It's kind of like having a coach, I was like, oh,
I'm picturing Gordon Ramsay right now, like screaming at people.
And that's for real. Like, I definitely have worked with chefs like that. And, it's, it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
I can handle it. Like I said, with the athletic background and having coaches who are very hard on you, I was fine with it. And it makes you better, and it makes you really push yourself. And it also felt like a team. Being in a kitchen, it's a family. You are working every holiday, every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I would get in the kitchen at 11 a.m. and I wouldn't leave till 1 a.m., and you just get back in the next day and do it all over again. You have no life. And that was tough. But I also was like, this is my moment to immerse myself in this world and extract everything I can. And the opportunity to learn under such fantastic chefs. I mean, I was very, very, I don't want to say lucky, because I was the one that did the work and created the opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
But I also knew that I had some pretty special people I was learning under, and I was very, very grateful for that. While I was working for the restaurant at Meadowood, which is a 3 Michelin star restaurant, the French Laundry is the only other California 3 Michelin star, and they're both in the Napa Valley, very close to each other.
Mm-hmm.
They had begun constructing a culinary farm, and so I started to help out there. And I really almost instantly was just like, whoa, guys, like, this is it. This is where it's at, because I could use my body, I could be outside, I could still work with food in a very intimate and connected way. And it for me was like, all right, well, 2 years of culinary school and I'm coming out a farmer. I don't know, but it just is the way it's got to be. It's the right way. So
they can't make those extraordinary meals and create those experiences for people without the right ingredients, right? And I think so much of what we consume, we're so disconnected from. And I am guilty of that still. Sometimes I'm just like, yeah, I am going to eat fast food today, and I'm going to love it, and it's going to be delicious, and I'm going to feel sick
sorry, not
afterwards.
sorry.
But
which I will say is a good mindset to have, like to if you know that you're eating something that is not healthy, or like,
you just gotta embrace it.
Don't beat yourself up about it. Don't, my philosophy. So like during this time of learning about fine dining and farming, I definitely was learning also about our food system. All these great documentaries were coming out, Forks Over Knives and Food Inc. And, really powerful information was starting to come to the surface. This was in 2012, 2013, about our food system. So I was getting kind of a crash course in that. I was auditing a lecture series given by Michael Pollan.
I love him. That's what I was just thinking about, was reading The Omnivore's Dilemma. And I think that really
Yes.
opened my eyes to like, your food isn't just your food.
Yeah.
It's so connected to the
Yeah.
whole ecosystem of, I mean, like if you don't know where your food came from, you don't have any awareness of like the impact on the environment of getting that thing from where it came from to your household, let alone like the nutritional value and all of those other things. But sorry.
All of those things. No, it's absolutely right. I mean, supply chain, who's growing the food, how it's being grown, what's being grown, right? So you have these like hundreds of thousands of acres of growing soy and corn and
Yeah.
basically these nutrient void
Yeah.
calories that go into being even more processed and void of any life and can sit on a shelf for months, if not
Years.
years. And so I was learning really what food was and what like this isn't food. Like you call it food and it's in a grocery store and you know you can eat it, but this isn't food. Like no, you know. And so having these awakenings myself, at that time also I went through a really intense breakup. I was together with this person for like 6 years and played volleyball. Like that whole part of my life had kind of come to an end, and I just turned 30 and starting this whole new phase. And so internally there were these big shifts happening as well, where I was learning while I was farming these beautiful life lessons about death and life and you know, how you prune a tomato, like how do you do that on the inside? So you're pruning away all of the things that aren't serving and concentrating the energies on the things that you deliberately want there in your life. And you know,
Oh,
just a
beautiful.
whole like Zen metaphor for life that I was gaining, you know, by working in the garden. So you know, long story short, I finished culinary school. I moved down to LA because I had identified Los Angeles as a place that was this emerging food scene, especially in the food scene that I wanted to work with, fine
Mm-hmm.
dining, and really creative chefs were coming to Los Angeles. And I didn't know how it would work out or if it would. I had some savings. I worked while I was in school, and I'm just like, all right, I'm just going to do this. If it doesn't work out, I'll hop on a line somewhere. I'll go into a kitchen and I'll cook and it's
Yeah.
fine. But I got to try, right? And so I built an urban farm in the front and backyard of this place I was renting. I was renting the back studio, and my friend owned the house, and he was kind of a bachelor, and there was like a futon frame and like a dead cactus in the front yard. He's like, yeah, do whatever you want. So it was kind of perfect. And, you know, about a month and a half, 2 months later, Bon Appetit was walking through my garden, writing an article about my work
Wow.
and the partnership that I had created with a restaurant there. And so it was a little bit surreal, you know, that moment and the subsequent like moments after and even years after, like what making that one bold decision did and what it set in motion in my life. But to say like I believe in something, I gonna just dive in head first, and I don't know how it'll work out, but I know it'll be okay because I do truly believe that there's a need for this in Los Angeles. I'll find a chef in there who finds value in what I'm doing, and we'll make it work. And we
That's
did.
so cool.
And yeah, and a few months after that, we were awarded Best New Restaurant by Bon Appetit, Best New Restaurant in America for 2013, which was another
Wow.
moment of
Yeah.
like, did that just happen, guys? Like, what's going on?
And
Like,
so
what?
you were providing them with produce from your farm,
So it was an exclusive
your
partnership.
farm.
Yeah, urban farm. So
Yeah.
it was an exclusive partnership where everything that I grew on that site was specifically for this restaurant. I had a very connected line of communication with the kitchen, especially with the executive chef. And, you know, I would talk about like, okay, what about growing this or harvesting at this size or try this flavor? Or he would come to me and
Wow.
say, what about growing this? Or no, I want it a little bit bigger. You know, this is a big benefit about having your own culinary farm in the restaurant industry, to have that kind of control and to know, especially in LA, all of the chefs are shopping at the same farmers market and working with the same purveyors. So if you are growing things yourself, you can grow things that aren't available to the market, which is really
Yeah.
where I
You
kind of
get
found
to
my
stand
niche. I'm
out.
like, I'm not going to grow a, you know, a regular zucchini. Like you can go get one of those at the Santa Monica Farmers Market. There's excellent growers that's there for you. But I wanted to set myself apart, and I wanted to provide things to a chef that you couldn't easily get, or that you had to grow yourself to get. During that time, I was also foraging. So I learned about foraging up in Napa. When I came down here, I would go once a week to the Central Coast. I would start off on the coast and forage seaweeds and wild kind of edibles. And then I would go into a friend of mine owns like a 600-acre ranch on the coastline there. And my parents here live in Ojai. And I would just glean all of these things and, buckets worth of stuff, load them in my car, and head back down to like grungy downtown LA with like a whole car full of, I opened up the trunk and it was just like flowers, and there was like, oh, there goes a butterfly. And here I am like in that danky alleyway of downtown LA. And it did feel like my expression of bringing plants to the people, like bringing this greenness. And I can only carry so much in my car. We're a tiny restaurant. It's a tiny little urban farm we have. But I felt like, well, this is what I can do. If I'm going to do something, it can be holding up my little green flashlight, like out in the world and saying like, I'm here. I've got these plants. Does anyone else want to play with me? And, it worked.
Why? So I love that. I love that for the community, and I love that you're doing your part. And the imagery of butterflies coming out of your car, so beautiful. So can we talk about like the global importance of making food choices that are better? And I think by that, I mean, like, we don't really get an education anywhere. At least I didn't. I grew up in like Redlands, California. It's in San Bernardino County. I think mostly like white middle class community, and our education was like neither here nor there. But it's probably like the baseline of towns that are similar to that, where it's like, our public schools aren't amazing, but they weren't the worst in the nation either. But there was zero education about food, other than like, you eat 3 meals a day and here's a food pyramid that's created by your government. And like, that's it. And so we were the weird kids because my parents are both immigrants to this country, and they don't have the same ideas about food as like a traditional American family. And so my mom would like drive like outside of our town to where there'd be like a guy on the side of the road with a fruit stand, and it was stuff that he grew. And she would come home with like, I mean, literally her whole car full of stuff, and she would use it to like decorate the house. Like there'd be bowls of pomegranates, or like,
I love it.
Carve a tomato into a rose and put it on top of a salad. And we were always like, can't I just have like a bologna sandwich?
Like, Mom, you're so
like, I want to eat all the other garbage that everybody else is eating, and instead we have to like eat whole grain bread that weighs like 15 pounds. But that was what we grew up with. And now, and as an adult, obviously I'm so thankful for that upbringing, because I don't crave unhealthy. I mean, other than I just told you, I love fast food sometimes. But for the most part, I am drawn to fresh fruits and vegetables. Like, that's the flavor that I crave. But I still never got an education about it, not even really from my parents. It was just like, this is what you're going to eat because it's what's on your plate. And so as an adult, and then becoming a parent and having to learn more about food and nutrition and what feels right in my body and what I feel good about giving to my kids, I had to dig in and like really do more research, because it's not just readily available for everyone. I mean, you have to be more proactive, I think, to get it.
Well, and what you're saying is so much of most people's experience in this country around food, or at least it has been up until a very recent point. And, we're talking about a couple things. We're talking about food culture, right? So the food culture in, every culture will have their food culture, because food is such a massive part of who we are as animals, as humans. And so the food culture in America is of like, well, I don't need to think about where it comes from, or it's here. It's food. It's on the shelf. I go to the market. I get what I need. I bring it home. I don't want to think about it. And we're now starting to have this realization in a lot of parts of our lives, like, whoa, like, guys, I did not even know that this kind of stuff was going on behind the scenes here. Like, this isn't okay, or like, now that I know, I'll make a different choice. Or, now that I know, maybe the correct way isn't out there yet, but at least we are identifying what it isn't working, right? And that is definitely happened to our food system over the last like decade, I would say. People starting to have the awareness. And
I mean, so I had my oldest son when I was 18. And though I came from a middle class family, my dad, he was always a big fan of like teaching you a lesson.
Mhm.
And so while he could have helped me financially, he chose not to because I had made a decision to become a parent, and that's logical. And so he told me, he's like, well, if you're struggling, because I lived in Santa Cruz, it was a very expensive community, especially for an 18-year-old in college. I was in my second year of college at that time, and then trying to like navigate pregnancy and having a baby. And so he was like, well, there's so many government resources, you can get food stamps. And I was like, food stamps? Like, I don't even know what that means. And I had to like do the research, and I like talk to a counselor at the WIC program, and then they give you like the allotment of food that is supposed to be full of nutrients for you and your developing baby. And it is appalling.
It's appalling.
It's like the fact that that is what we consider to be food, and that is what our government provides as a resource for people who are already struggling is like a joke. Like
Well,
a
I think
giant can of pineapple juice that's like all sugar and so gross.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about though is why we are experiencing what we are experiencing socially and economically, and the revolt, the literal revolt that is happening, because in our country we'll say, okay, well, you'll have food, you'll get access to food. And I'm talking about, like just kind of the more impoverished parts of our community, and you will have access to food, but it's not going to be healthy. You will have access to a roof over your head, and you can live in this community over here, but it's not going to be safe. Here's some water, you can drink it, but it's not going to be like clean water. There's probably going to be shit in it because we don't put the resources that are needed into these communities. So this idea of like minimum wage, you're going to have access to a certain quality of life, but it's not going to be a dignified life. You're going to be eating food this way that you have access to. You're going to be sick. It will cause depression, it will cause diabetes, it will cause high blood pressure, obesity, so it's really asking ourselves, what kind of society do we want? And if we're going to have this discussion on a domestic level, we need to have it on a global level, right? And your question about, sourcing and, how are we thinking about like the global food system and all of that, I want to share a piece of information. I was listening to a podcast, and a professor of Black Studies, his name was Kahindi Andrews, Professor Andrews, and he said that America in particular has a psychosis around just what we're talking about. So right now in the Congo, there are little African children in mines extracting cobalt, which is a mineral that we use in all of our technology. So our cell phones, our laptops, our batteries. And that is taking place because we live in a system, a global economic system, that not only allows for the exploitation of children to gain this resource that we need, but is set up and designed in a way that it is essential to exploit bodies and the natural resources to be able to function. So the real cost of a cell phone should be, I think it's something like over $10,000. If everyone involved in making the cell phone got paid a dignified and living wage, it would be right? So once I had that bit of information, I was like, okay.
Do I need to upgrade my iPhone every year? Like what? That's where it just keeps going, right? Like, so if your phone should have cost $10,000, but it's not, then you know that you're exploiting all of those resources. And then we still have this mentality of like, well, there's a newer model, so I'm just going to throw this in
Right.
the garbage and I'm going to
Right.
get another one.
So it doesn't just stop at our phones. The same cases are involved with our food, with our clothing, with our cars, with our everything that you see around you. And Amazon is a great example of this, right? I'm like, all right, well, if this system is what it is and the people making the most off of the backs of, you know, the global labor force and literally the world, like the resources in the world, you look at something like Amazon, you get on there and you're like, okay, I want a kid's toothbrush. Here's like the cheapest options. Great. I don't care who made it, how it's made, what it's made out of, where it's coming from in the world. I just want it. That's a great price. Great. Put the phone down. See you in, 2 days. Right.
Yeah.
So knowing that information and how pervasive this system is in every part of our life, and how literally, well, it's like, great, how do I exist without a cell phone? And great, how do I exist without a car? And like these essential things that I have in my life, when they are literally built on the back, like the heartbreak that I felt when I was, and also the irony, listening to his words on my phone, right? And it's like, okay, all right. And that's the psychosis he's talking about. It's like, but you still move forward. You're still buying things on Amazon. You're still going to the grocery store and looking for the cheapest price of this food item.
Right. As opposed to thinking, and I know, so that's an interesting one because price is a very important factor in food consumption, but also it should be coupled with like the knowledge of what it is that you're consuming or where it's coming from. So the fact that like people have this idea that in order to eat healthy, it inevitably means that it is more expensive than not eating healthy, that is absurd. First, like, I just can't even imagine not being able to eat healthy foods because it's too expensive to do that, which means that we're either making access to organic foods much too difficult for everyone to be able to consume them, or we are lowering the price point of bullshit foods that have no nutrients so that that's what's consumed by poorer people.
It's both of those things. It's all of the things, right? There are many streams that lead into this massive like lake of an issue that we have. And so for me, I was like, all right, well, if we're going to fix this problem, how? I started just kind of like meditate on it and channel and like try and download some information of like, all right, what as an individual can I do? And what as a larger society can we do? And how can we change something that feels so embedded in every part of our everyday life, from the moment you wake up, from the bed you're sleeping on and getting up out of, to like the food that you're making for your children at breakfast. Like, where do we even start to like disassemble, right? And the answer was, in order to create radical change, we need to think radically different about what we're doing, about how we're serving with our gifts, about how we are voting with our dollar, about how we are literally voting with our vote, and thinking differently about how we want to now move forward with this developing global economy and the use of technology. I mean, so many issues that I have with it, and like, oh, like social media and screen time, and great, like there is also such a transformative tool in front of us if we use it the right way, and or if we choose to use it in that way. I won't say right or wrong or any of that, because
it's very powerful.
It's no, there's no judgment here. It's just making a blanket, like I call it like I see it, right? And so to say like, all right, I want to start to turn this big ship in this direction, for me it was like, well, I know food. Okay, so what can I do in this world? Decentralizing food, taking it and making it way more available to everybody, right? And so with that, we need as many people as possible growing their own food, each individual in their own way, however they can do it, whether that looks like a couple of garden beds in the yard, or as a young person saying, you know what, becoming a local organic farmer is something that I find value in, and I know something my community will find value in, right?
Yeah.
And creating change in that way, you know, specifically working in Los Angeles, people call it a food desert, or there's areas that are a food desert. And to me, it's just that there has been, it's almost feels like it's been like a choking off of, you know, it feels like it's like the blood supply has not gone to these areas, and we need to open it back up and create freshness and new energy into it. And so the work that I do mostly now today is in the nonprofit sector, and I work with a homeless family shelter called Upward Bound House, and they have shelters throughout LA. I run an urban farm program for them. We've got an urban farm in Santa Monica. We're starting a couple in South LA, Compton, Watts area. And, you know, that there are other organizations doing this kind of work. They're barely known. They're a blip on a radar for most people. But if we can interject like more resources, more manpower, taking money that you're spending on unnecessary things, or taking money that normally you're like, oh, I'll just, you know, donate it to whoever, whatever, like very intentionally putting those resources into places where you know that work is already being done, that you can just go in and accelerate it, right?
Yeah,
and so that's and that's kind of the work that I'm doing, at least on a grassroots level, helping any of the families that come through the shelter have that engagement with food, right? So they come on
the people who are coming through Upward Bound House, are they working in the farms?
Not working. We have employees, but it's everything that's grown on the farms goes to the shelter pantry, so it gets dispersed to the families. But there's monthly events where we host families, and it's just fun. It's play, experiential activities for the kids. But then in addition to that, we offer like workshops. So healthy cooking, very approachable recipes. We like to create samples for the clients that come through and have them eat it. Oh, this is so good. Great. Here's a recipe. Here's how to make it. All of the ingredients that we're using are inexpensive, very accessible to you, and really just imparting some very basic skills, cooking skills that can elevate a dish that anybody would be happy to know, like, here's how you properly saute something, or here's how to make your own vinaigrette. And you know, a lot of it too is changing the conditioned palate. If you're eating a certain type of food for years after years after years, and you all of a sudden introduce, like, here's a raw kale salad, there is some hesitation, there is some walls that need to be broken down, there is having to be mindful or thoughtful about how and what recipes we choose, and you know, all of that goes into it. But that's my work, right? Like, that's where I'm putting in my unique gifts and background to try and make a difference in this like larger scale. So if the individual contains the power to make change, one of my goals as well is to help the individual to elevate in order to make these changes more obvious. Like, I feel that the modern body is not being used in a way that can help to inform that, you know, the idea of trusting your instincts, trusting your gut, feeling grounded in a healthy body, getting regular sleep, not having to deal with health issues. Blood sugar is such a mood swinger, you know, so like regulating blood sugar. So if I can help people in that way, I feel like I'm contributing to the ability to let the individual crack open the information that they need to be receiving to solve our humanity's next big issues, like creating a global a global stage where everybody gets a chance at a dignified life. Because he also said, he's like, the biggest problem that most people in the world are facing, they don't have toilets. They don't have toilets. In America, you know, I think that we forget what poverty really can look like, right? Yeah. And what real issues people around the world are facing. And the fact that we go into these communities and say, hey, you're a form of cheap labor, and you so badly need money, and your government so badly needs it, that you're willing to let us destroy your ecosystem around you and your environment because you just want a chance at what we're over here in the US, like living our life, right? And we're getting that same domestic version of it. You know, we're getting that same domestic version of like, okay, yeah, you can like be in the US, right? But you're not going to get access to like all this, like clean, healthy food and a safe society, a safe community, and a job that pays you a real living wage to where you don't have to work two of them just to make ends meet and send your kid to college, you know? So
that is definitely reserved for like the very small percentage of very privileged people in our country. I do love what you said about contributing to people to like raise their own vibration, so to speak, like to elevate how healthy they feel in their own bodies. And that, I don't think that, honestly, I think a lot of people don't even equate what they eat to how they feel in their body, or that your food does control like your hormone regulation, how you sleep, your body's ability to fight off illness. All of these, like food is not just like I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat the first thing in front of my face. It's literally the nutrients that your body needs to stay alive and to thrive and to function. And this is another huge area, right? Like, because there's just it's like food impacts every single thing in the world. But if you have whole populations of humans who don't have access to just like fruits and vegetables that grow out of the ground, then they're already like their healthcare bills are going to be so much higher. Their like everything, their ability to be a productive member of society, their ability to regulate their own mental health, just all of these things, like to be a good parent, to, you know, like I can't be a good parent if I'm just like chronically depressed and can't get out of bed because I'm just always fighting off illness.
Exactly.
And so that's the thing that I love so much about the education that you do and like the work that you're doing through Upward Bound House is changing people's palates, introducing them to foods that actually grew out of the ground. I mean, that is a connection to Mother Earth at its finest, at its most simplest and truest form. And you can make something directly out of the earth, rinse it and eat it. That's, I mean, a dream come true. That's what most food should be.
Well, and it's so interesting because like in our society, we've come so on the other side of it to where if like you were growing your food in your front yard and you were definitely not considered wealthy, or it's like, no, like, or if you had chickens in your backyard, it's like, oh, like, poor people, like having to like have your own. And now ironically, that is
it's like
what the wealthy people are now and are doing. And, you know,
but you
also,
know what? That's good too. Like, good for them. At least if everybody gets on this thing, that's amazing. Yes. And I think the more we can get people to realize the impact of their food choices, the more, and like you said a while back, voting with your dollars. I recently watched the film 13th, which is amazing. If you have not already seen it, whoever is listening, you should stop what you're doing and watch it immediately. But I learned and I'm also one of those people who like, as I'm really excited and watching something, I'm also like Googling more information about it.
Yeah, I do the same.
So I was just like, my brain was exploding with all of this information and I wanted to like know everything I could. And I started digging into like what companies are supporting this process of like food moving through our prison industrial complex. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like, I mean, there's probably 7 McDonald's in our neighborhood within like a walking distance radius. And reading that like McDonald's employs prison laborers to shape their hamburger patties that we just think are like delicious and so inexpensive, like that's inexpensive for us to eat, is crazy. And I was just like, no, never again. I'm not going to buy anything from McDonald's.
It's having the individual make these choices every step of the way to say,
Yeah.
oh, I know that toothbrush is cheaper, but I'm actually going to go down to my local market. There's this really cute bamboo one, and it's made by a company that's 20 miles from here.
Yeah.
And
you
it's
know what? It's
$10 more.
Yeah.
You know?
But that's not cheaper. Like buying something
right.
that costs you $2 does not make it cheaper in its impact on the environment, in its impact on our political system, in what it is telling these huge corporations that it is okay to continue to do to humanity and to our planet. And that to me is like, I would rather get our food from like there's so many growers in California and like
we're very
cattle
lucky.
ranchers and all of it. Like we have very close in proximity access to food that is grown in our own state. And that's my biggest, like the biggest shift that I have made in our family is like, I am only buying produce and meats and seafood that are coming from California.
That's it. And that is the systematic that you go down the list of like, okay, every intersection that I have where I have a say, it's going to be this way, you know, and maybe it's not always going to be that choice, but at least you're conscious about it when you're making it. At least you're aware, like, okay, I know what I'm doing when I'm buying this. And I know, like, even though it's cheaper or whatever, like I'm aware. And at some point, aligning, like, all of the change comes within, right? So at some point, the individual has to align with wanting to live in a world and wanting to leave the world for our children in a way that is fair for everybody. And that's really, really hard because it requires the individual to say, I will have less so someone else can have more.
And that is like not the American way.
It's not the human way, you know, to say, I will, you know, another talk I was listening to, the guy gave a great example. He's like, you see all these New Yorkers in Manhattan, they all moved out to like the boroughs like Williamsburg and Brooklyn, and oh, it's more diverse, and you know, there's more Black people, it's great. But you didn't send your kids to the Black schools, you created your own schools for the you know, private schools, to where, you know, oh, but I got to make sure they're getting a good education. It's like, wait, we need people that are willing to be brave enough to say, no, I'm sending my kid to the Black school and we're all together going to make it better. Because everybody in this neighborhood should have a better shot at an education.
100%.
Because that really is what it's about, to say, okay, I will, you know, my kids maybe will have less in order for everybody, you know, in the US to have more. But ultimately, your kid is going to live in a way better society, a way healthier society, a way safer society. So it's that impulse. And I feel like the Native American culture identified it so well with like the white man and the sickness of consumption, the sickness of creating boundaries and borders, on putting up fences and taking more than you need. It is a sickness, right? And so to be able to identify that within ourselves and to consciously address it and consciously do the work inward, to where we will express it with all of our choices outward. And I don't want to vilify places like McDonald's or these big corporations, because to me, our political system, our corporations, our marketing, they're all a reflection of what we are creating ourselves, and what we are manning that ship, right? We are the captains of that ship. And so at some point,
everyone is demanding that, you know, a Big Mac is 2 for $5.
Yes.
Then they have to do whatever it's going to take to get their price point down to be able to make a profit off of that. And I think in their defense, I did read that they no longer use the prison system. They did for a very long time. But anyway, everyone do your own research on where.
But it's also about, okay, maybe they're not using the prison system, but the food that they're growing is done with the exploitation of the environment. the people who are growing that kind of food are being exploited because usually they're immigrants to this country and they don't have the same protections as citizens of this country do. The people who work in McDonald's are usually getting paid a very low wage, a minimum wage, but what does that get you in this world? So every step of that burger is at the
really
sacrifice of a lot of things, right? And so it's having that more, systematic, the bigger picture, the interconnectivity of all of these things coming together, and it served its purpose well. We as a country, coming out of World War II, getting into the 50s, like we wanted to create a stable food system that allowed for this expanding industry that we had. It was supposed to give us more, it's like the technology, it's going to give you more time and freedom, and you won't have to work. You just pop this in the microwave and you've got food, right? Open up this box and all of a sudden you have a cake. So in our naivete as people, we're like, yes, this is great. Like there's no more insecurities about food and famine. And we came through those times of scarcity. And now we took this science and the technology and we developed a system where it's like our grocery stores are filled. Every aisle is filled with anything you could ever imagine. We did it, guys. But what does that mean, right? And how did we do it? And who did we do it on the backs of? And so I look at Monsanto. We so want to vilify Monsanto. But the more I learn about the world, the more I learn it's not black and white. It's not good and bad, because Monsanto, through its modifications of food and grain and staples, through their technological, this is why Bill Gates invests in Monsanto. They are stabilizing economies and societies around the world. They are creating more stability in order, just because as Americans, we're like, oh, we had our moment where we did whatever we had to do to create food accessibility and stability. And that's for us. But you guys, you don't get that. Like, no, like you're killing everything and you can't use Monsanto and they're the devil. Like, excuse me, we went through the same progress just a few decades earlier. And we afforded ourselves that right. And now we're saying, no, it's not for you. And then, you have these power vacuums and this is how terrorists and wars start and famine and all of this. So as much as Monsanto is a villain in what they've done to the environment, they were at the sharp end of the spear that we were pushing into the future of our food system, of food and technology. And so as much as I want to say there should never be a Monsanto out there, we do need this marrying of technology and this ability to create accessibility and stability in communities all around the world. But we have to do it sustainably. That's the kicker.
Exactly. That's the most important part. Food is a really big topic, you guys. I bet nobody was prepared for this coming in.
I know you
said to make a salad. No. Politics, humanity, racism, everything.
All of it. It's all. Hang on. I'm losing a little bit of sun, so I'm gonna just move my shade. I'm just gonna move my chair back.
So, and this is why I started the conversation even by saying, like, I already know that we're gonna connect on so many other topics, because this is wildly fascinating for me, and I think that there's so much information for people to get to learn just about how to make better food choices, whether they're motivated to be healthier or they're motivated to be more politically aware of their food choices or environmentally aware. Whatever it is that motivates you to make better choices, I encourage you to really think about, like, do you know where your food came from? And what can you do to even make like the tiniest shift? And that's actually a question maybe that you can answer for us, is like, what is something like, so now, right, if you have all of like the wealthy people are like, oh, it's fun to grow my own food again, which is cool. I'm not knocking wealthy people.
No, and this is not, I have to say, as much as I talk about disparity in our societies with the
Yeah.
haves and the have-nots. This is not to knock anybody. This is not there. Like I said, there
100%
are
no.
villains
Yeah.
here, but it's identifying the disparity and creating awareness around that.
Yeah.
So there's no bad guys here. You didn't do anything
So,
wrong if, like, you know, you're
yeah,
growing your own food and you live in a nice house.
which is amazing. And
Yeah.
like good for that should be like, I wish that for everyone. But what I would like to talk about is like for anyone, like, so that cost isn't a barrier, how do you grow your own food? Like, if you're living in a studio apartment in, you know, like anywhere in the United States and you're struggling, you're making minimum wage, or maybe you're even working under the table or you're working 4 jobs and you're listening to this and you're thinking, I could never grow my own food. That's not a reality for me. Or it's too expensive, or like, because I feel like that's not necessarily the case, and that maybe it is very accessible for everyone, but they just don't realize how simple it can be.
Yeah. So, you know, to the individual who is living in a studio apartment and doesn't have their own plot or anything like that, and is interested in growing your own food or interested in the process, because just because you can't grow your own food doesn't mean you can't eat healthy, right? So you can make that decision or eat, you know, organic, clean food. You can make that decision, but if you do decide, I also want to play a part in growing it, and I think that I'm attracted to it. It's a very basic human function to be interested in where your food comes from and how to grow it. And we've all saw the fragility of our food system with COVID, and there was this huge like upwelling of like, wait, like I should maybe start to grow my own food. I had so many people reaching out like, how do I build a bed, or where do I start, or right. So to have that interest is very normal and very instinctual. And to feed that interest, right? If you're in a studio apartment living in a kind of an urban setting, there is probably a community garden or organizations within, you know, a 10 to 20 mile radius where you can go and participate. So even if it's not your own plot, you are still actively participating in learning about growing your own food.
And
That being,
you can grow stuff in like pots, right?
yes.
Like you
So
don't
if you
need to
have
a
like
bunch of
a
plants.
balcony or a rooftop, anything like that, growing in pots is great. Also, for that kind of situation, I recommend growing in hydroponic vertical towers.
Oh, cool.
I'm most familiar with one made by a company called Tower Gardens, but there are other options on the market. It's really about finding whatever works for you. I know the Tower Gardens, you can make monthly payments. It's really low monthly payments. So within a year, it's paid off. And you're growing food. So taking into account how much one bunch of organic kale costs, right? And so over a year, if you grew a whole tower of organic kale and you're harvesting and you keep track, you can literally on paper see how much money you've saved even after you've paid off your tower, right?
Yeah.
So if you're juicing or something like that, these vertical towers are a great option. If you don't have a lot of space, if you don't have dirt, I highly recommend those. I'm a big fan. But like I said, growing, yeah, they're awesome. And then growing in pots and all of that, like just even having one plant that you are in relation to on a daily basis, that you are watering, that you are watching grow and watching the development. Like I said in the beginning of our conversation, with working on that farm and internally just doing so much growing and learning by just being in front of the plants and working with the plants and seeing nature work on that kind of scale.
Yeah.
It was really special, and an individual can absolutely experience this just by having a few potted plants. You don't have to grow all your food. I think that's a big thing where people are like, I don't have the space to grow my own food. Like, no one's asking you to grow every meal you're going to eat. Okay. Like
That's a lot.
we live in a society where we don't have to do that. Right. And there are great, excellent growers out there who have devoted their life to the practice of growing really nutritious, nutrient dense food. So don't feel like, oh, it's why bother? I only have, 5 feet little balcony. Like, it is worth it 100%. And the wisdom that you will extract from it will absolutely be an investment in your own vibration raising, right? Like, as you
I
put
love
it, like
that.
your own lifting up of and your own edification. So
Yeah. My
even if you don't have a
parents,
lot of space.
so my dad still lives in Redlands, and it's not farmland by any means, and they have maybe like 1 acre of land, but they were so intentional in, and they had the opportunity to be able to, everything that they planted in the ground is edible.
Awesome.
So, and they do have chickens. They had chickens before
Love
chickens
it.
were cool. They actually
Yes,
have
before they were trendy,
1,000
right?
chickens, which is crazy.
Amazing. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's officially too many chickens, but my stepmom sells them, so they're not like there all the time.
Oh my God, I love it.
But it is such a nice experience to wake up there and to, like, let's say you wanted to make an omelet and orange juice. You have everything that you need to be able to make that meal from your little place in the world. So you
Well,
can
I
get
think that's such a great
eggs. Yeah.
example, because that really, you look at a city planning, right? So we need, like, and this goes back into everything, right? So we
Yes.
need young people to go into universities with the mindset of, okay, if we're going to be planting landscapes around the city and public buildings, why can't it be edible? Like,
Yeah.
what is wrong with that? Or why
There's
can't
no
we
reason.
designate these growing zones?
Yeah.
Or, you know, if we're planting a tree, can it be a tree that produces food? Like,
In
you know,
every
and so
community, like wherever there's a park, wherever there's a tree
yes,
planted. Did you hear
yes.
about Copenhagen and the apple trees?
No, I don't think so.
So, I mean, Denmark is just so progressive in their social responsibility anyway, I feel like. But they just decided that, like, wherever they're planting trees throughout the city, they're going to be planting apple trees, or maybe it's not apples, but it's some kind of a fruit tree,
A
so
fruiting
that
tree. Yeah.
every citizen of that town, as they're riding their bike or walking to work or whatever, if they're hungry and they need a
Like,
snack,
oh, look,
they have
an
a
apple.
healthy organic
Right.
snack that is free to them.
Yeah.
That is so cool. Like, that kind of thinking is exactly what I want to see more of.
Well, consider the source. You know, I heard another great podcast just last night. It was Dax Shepard's podcast, Armchair Expert,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a gentleman named Jeffrey Sachs on, and he's an economist, and he literally was hired to help countries coming out of the communist revolution go into a more market society and market economy. And he said, he's like, out of all of the societies that I've seen, out of all of the economies, all the systems, the people who have it figured down are these Scandinavian countries, because it's a more a democratic socialist
Mm-hmm.
is what he refers to himself as, which after hearing what it is, I'm like, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
Because I don't necessarily like identify with the, you know, more conservative Republican or liberal
Yeah.
Democratic. Like, it's a little crazy out there right now. But I definitely believe in creating a society where everybody gets the opportunity to have access to the abundance that we all have around us. We
Yeah,
see the abundance,
absolutely.
you know, you see Jeff Bezos with hundreds of billions of like, to say
Yeah.
that one person, hundreds of billions, right?
Yeah.
How are we if money is energy, how are we like recycling that energy back into a system where everybody can have a more dignified life, and creating food accessibility, like
Mm-hmm.
planting an apple tree in a street? That's it, right? That is
Yeah, it's
literal
amazing.
food accessibility. So having that on every level of our government, of our education system, of how we design our buildings and our new development, architecture, how are we infusing these kinds of thoughts with the progress, you know, that is inevitable?
Yeah, I love that. I want to plant an apple tree now.
I know, apple trees are beautiful, and you can like
But,
espalier them, so you can like trellis them, and they look so chic. Like,
oh,
there's
so
yeah,
cool. I
yeah.
really I need your help, and I will seek your advice on planting a lot more things that are edible in our yard.
Oh, that's a
Um,
follow-up. That's a follow-up episode.
it
I'll
is
come to your
totally, yeah,
place. We can
100%.
record
Because,
it.
yeah, and I want people to see like what we end up doing, because like I would love to grow my own food, but I know that I'm like quite lazy when it comes to maintaining things.
Yeah.
But I want to place a bigger focus on like my connection to nature and being like touching dirt, whether it's like pulling weeds or planting something, or even just if I'm cooking, to be able to go out and like pluck a branch of like fresh rosemary. Those things make me so happy. And for some reason, I just like have not incorporated that into being a bigger part of my life. And I want to, and not just for me, but also for the kids, to see that there's more to life than like playing video games or sitting in your, it just really drives me nuts, the screen time, especially during quarantine. And now
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I feel like we all get a pass because we're just trying to survive,
yeah.
right? Everybody's watching a
And I
little
don't
more
want
screen
them to,
time.
like, I don't want that to be their passion in life. I want their passion to be that they're like outside with sunshine on their face, and that they have an awareness of the earth and what it provides for them.
Yeah. Well, as like,
Um,
if I were to be working with you on an individual level and like kind of coaching you, I would invite you to explore, like, yes, it's something that you've wanted and it brings you so much joy, yet for whatever reason, you've created a barrier for yourself.
yeah.
So I'd be like, okay, go like explore that. But also, you know, we kind of talked about this in our initial conversation, like the pattern of a person who doesn't really necessarily know what they're doing, but has that draw and that interest and that motivation to be like, okay, so like, we're just going to plant some stuff, we're going to go for it, and a week later everything's dead and you're frustrated and you're like, fuck it, you know, like whatever. But then you
That was
come
dead.
back, right? But then you come back around and you find yourself a couple months later and there's an article that you read or something
Yeah.
that you saw and you're like, God, I really, like, I'll try again. Like, let me just whatever. So you will continue to come back to this place of, I know that this is what I want. So like I said, explore what blocks you have around why you don't have it yet. And then and I tell people it's a few just things to think about. Number one, find your plot, right? So find where in your life you can physically grow something, whether that's you have a balcony or you have a huge yard or whatever. So identify the place in your space that allows for sunlight. That's a big one, like consistent sunlight that has hookups to water. And then from there, the second part, start small, because I think a lot of times people can get a little overwhelmed where it's like, I've got, you know, 2 10-foot beds and we're going to plant them all. And then it just gets overwhelming. Right. And it's really hard to learn from those experiences. So if you start small,
everything.
all the things, which is great because it's that passion and energy that's going to continue to like cycle you back around to like, I need to grow my food. So then starting at a place where maybe you just have a couple of containers or a small little bed or one tower that you can focus on at least for a few months to get you up and going, to be like, all right, I feel ready, I'm confident, let's plant some more. The third thing is, once you've identified your plot and you're starting small, the third phase is the educational phase or the immersive phase, where there's never been a better time to learn how to grow your own food. There are so many resources for the individual online. There are so many fantastic growers who are sharing videos. And if you've got a bug eating it, like, what's eating my broccoli? And then you can find like exactly what's eating your broccoli and how to fix it, right? So, you know, it is, as much as we hate these cell phones because they're like, you know, they can be the catalyst for change and the change agent. So you've identified your plot, you're starting small, you've immersed yourself in learning, but a lot of people kind of get stopped up at that phase. They'll watch a bunch of videos, they'll really, you know, kind of geek out on it. But when it comes to actually doing it and doing the work, it's pushing beyond that, you know, kind of hesitation and just diving into it and going for it. Now, it's always great to have a mentor or somebody that you can reach out to directly, someone in your own circle that's like send you a picture of the plant, like, hey, do you know what's going on with it? Like, why is this like yellow, or what's up with this leaf, or whatever.
Mhm.
And so that's on the individual to find someone in their own network that they know that knows a little bit more than they do about food. And I have to say, mentorship is something that I really leaned on in culinary school and in farming. Both of those industries contain individuals who are so readily available to share their knowledge, especially growers, farmers. They're just so free and open to share with you their techniques and what they've learned, and really your own growing becomes an amalgamation of this information that you've woven into yourself from a bunch of different people, and it's your own expression of how you want to grow, or what you want to grow, or
Yeah.
your own personal experience or experiments, and your own unique microclimate and where you're growing, and the challenges that come up in your own space at your own plot. So, I would encourage you to just make sure you support yourself in this journey, and to say, like, okay, I've got my person who I can lean on, that can be me for you, Elsa, of just sending pictures. What do I do? And maybe we can record that process too, of like,
Yeah.
once we identify your spot and you get you started, we can do some like video coaching sessions and
Yes, I
all
love
of that. I think it's a great learning experience for a lot of people who will get to follow along with your learning experience, because it's very common, like where you're at, and knowing, like, for my kids, this is important, especially because our food system is what it is. Kids 100 years ago, they did not need to know where their food came from. They were
They
the ones
went out
helping
and
grow it,
yeah,
right? And
exactly.
killing the animals they were eating, and
Yeah.
milking the cows or the goats, or they were a part of it. And now, because of our modern society, as mothers, especially, like so much of the work, especially in the nonprofit, I work a lot with women. We know the importance of this connection, and we want to instill it in our children. And it is so instinctual and biological. It's a survival skill, right?
Yeah.
So you're not alone in exactly where you are. And I think it would create so much like healing and education for people if we got you going and you felt good.
Yeah. I hope so. I look forward to that.
Me too.
Thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing your thoughts and all of your knowledge, which I'm just like blown. Every time I chat with you, I'm like, I need to read more. I need to like get, more involved in everything. It's just like your passion really comes through, but it's like passion with knowledge and education, and it's obvious that you want to always like learn more and do better. And I love that.
Well,
Uh,
thank you. And I can say the same for you. I mean, I appreciate so much your curiosity, and you ask such great questions, and you're asking the right questions, about sourcing, supply chain. How can I make a difference as an individual? How do we even start to think about these concepts, and then doing the work within your own body, and which I love so much about your business is that is such a big part
yeah.
of what you do. And I think it can be the starting off place for so many of our jobs or conversations, or it's starting with like the internal work. And so I feel like you and I are allies in that way of helping raise people's vibrations, and helping usher this new awakening that we're all experiencing. And we're all just, I think, who said it, we're all just walking each other home, right?
I love
His
that.
name escapes me. He just passed away. But this is new for everybody. Like this experience, this awakening, the veil is being lifted for a lot of people, and it it is needing a time of grounding. And
Hmm.
that's where people like yourself and my wisdom, and people who are doing work in their own specific fields in this way can become leaders. And so thank you for your leadership, and thank you for having me. And I look forward to more work with you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Great.